Secretary Frostman, I'll turn it over to you to talk a little about economic recovery, and then we'll have some time for questions. So thanks for joining us. And I bet I have to unmute you. There.
Well, thanks.
There we go.
Thank you, Todd, and thanks for unmuting me. I appreciate the chance to be here today, and thanks to everyone that's joined us on the call. A few familiar names, but yeah, it's I think a really opportune time to share some updates on, of course, unemployment insurance. But as we slowly but surely start to pivot toward recovery, I think it's important to talk about some of the programs we have to offer as it relates to recovery at DWD. We've got a really robust set of services that help get folks employed that were unemployed, and also help people advance in the workforce that are already employed. But I'll start when I have these calls. I'm always grateful to have business leaders on the line, but like to start by just creating some context around what we're seeing in the unemployment world. A story just came out last week from ABC News on a national scale, talking about the unprecedented nature of the economic crisis that we're currently in relation to unemployment. And prior to this COVID-related crisis, the previous record nationally for most new unemployment claims in 1 week was about 690,000 during the 1982 recession. And last week was the 20th week in a row of more than 1 million new claims in a week in the US. And that first week of COVID, the first full week, we beat the previous record tenfold. So, nationally, we've never seen anything like this. In Wisconsin, in a 1 month period from March to April, we went from 3.3% unemployment to more than 13%, so a 10% jump in 1 month. And obviously that's had an effect on unemployment insurance in Wisconsin, and of course, unemployed folks in our state. And from a Wisconsin perspective, I think it's important also to kind of draw some attention to the context of the volume we're seeing. In the last 4.5 months, we've had about 840-ish thousand initial claims. And for reference, we had 290,000 claims in all of 2019. So almost tripled that in a matter of 4.5 months. And we peaked in late March, around 100,000 new claims in a week, and we've tapered off pretty steadily in April and May, and have seen sustained levels continuing to drop, and we've dropped the last couple of weeks. So hopefully that's a positive sign here going forward. And then as far as the weekly or recurring claims, we've had just shy of 5.5 million weeks claimed in the state since March 15th, which compares to about 1.6 million in all of 19. So in about 5 months, we've more than tripled all that we had last year. So historic, unprecedented volume, and obviously as a result of that, our workload remains really high at DWD. Our most recent stats, Monday are our big numbers day, so it's always kind of a creates some angst around getting those, but it's we've had some really strong progress these last few weeks, which we're grateful for. But of the 5.5 million weeks claimed, we've resolved, which means either paid or denied, about 4.8 million, so just north of 88%, about 88.4%, and we continue to see strong progress from our adjudicators, both in regular UI and one of the federal programs, Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, also known as PUA. So even though we're making strong week-over-week progress on the factors over which we have control, what we can adjudicate, what we can clear, we're still seeing high levels of new issues coming in recent weeks, and it's still a pretty high sustained level of weekly claims. So we're hopeful that as we make progress on adjudication, that we'll hopefully see a tapering off of those new issues and those new weekly claims. And just to again give some context to hopefully effectively address that historic claim volume that we've never seen before, we've essentially quadrupled our staff in unemployment insurance. Starting in March, we're at about 500 people, and between vendors, new hires into the department, and reassigning people within state government, we peaked at around 2,000 people working on UI claims between those groups. So it's been a pretty massive on-ramp. And I think a particular interest, we've added over 400 adjudicators, so we're now up over 600, and have expanded our phone capacity from about 62 pre-pandemic to, I think, at a peak of about 800 people thus far between vendors and DWD staff, as well as some of those reassignments. And we have 2 call centers, one for unemployment insurance inquiries and another specifically for that PUA program, in addition to the folks we have working for us at DWD. And I know we were really anxious to get those up and running in late May. And again, just for some context, that first day that we had the call centers up and running, we made and took a combination of about 3,000 phone calls. We've since had days where we've made and took a combination of more than 20,000. So that's been really helpful. And as we've gotten those staff on board and trained, we've been able to expand the call center hours pretty substantially and adding Saturday hours. So that's been positive. Wait times are down, both for our regular call center for UI, and there's 2 different tiers of calls there, which I won't get into, one of which is kind of the easier tier, the second is more intricate. Those are both down, and then call times are also really minimal for those calling our PUA center or that need to speak to DWD. And getting to those levels of wait times and call volume is obviously taking people, and lots of them, and whether it was for adjudication, for our call centers, for claims processing, recruiting, vetting, hiring, and training that many people has been quite the lift, but we're seeing that work pay off, like I said, with strong progress week over week in terms of the work our adjudicators are doing. And so we're really pleased to see that moving forward. And we continue to backfill positions as we lose folks to normal attrition, especially in our call centers. I think just that industry has a really high turnover rate, so we see that in our numbers as we watch that closely. And I know people like us are watching very closely, the expiration of FPUC, which was at $600 a week, that expired the week ending July 25th. And I think it's been covered pretty well, but just want to make sure for the people on this call, it's important to note that if anyone, your friends, family, employees, filed for UI, PUA, or PEUC for the weeks ending 7/25 or before, they would still be eligible for that $600 a week in FPUC. Obviously, the president came out with executive orders this past weekend, which we are feverishly working through as far as getting questions answered from both FEMA and DOL. We still have a number of questions that relate to kind of the accounting piece, some of the match from a high level basis. It would be a $400 a week supplement to unemployment insurance for those claimants eligible for $100 or more in unemployment insurance through regular UI or through some of the federal programs. $300 of which would come from the feds. $100 have to come from the state. That $100 cannot come from the trust fund, but there's still some questions to be answered there. We're working, I guess, very closely with our legal team, with the governor, and with just everyone in the UI world, whether that's at DOL, FEMA, some of the associations around the country that work in workforce development, unemployment insurance, to make sure we can get our questions answered. And the application period is through September 10th, so it's 30 days from launch to application. The program will expire either at the earlier of when the $44 billion allocated is expended, or we reach December 27th. And so obviously watching those numbers and running projections very closely on that. So we'll see how that moves forward here. But to wrap up kind of the UI piece in a nutshell, thus far since March 15th, we've paid about 490,000 Wisconsinites, just under $3.4 billion between PUA, UI, PEUC, and FPUC. So that's been quite the lift, and we continue to work and to keep our folks working hard, and they've done. We continue to make progress there. And I just wanted to touch on one perhaps unorthodox or maybe unheralded success story throughout this pandemic has been the WorkShare program. So I'm not sure if folks on this call are familiar with WorkShare, but it allows employers to keep employees on the payroll even at partial hours and partial wages, but it keeps their employees attached to their benefits, and then it also makes them eligible for partial UI. And so it's a really popular program, or at least it is now. When we first started pre-pandemic, we had one WorkShare program on the books with about 20 participants. We peaked about 3 weeks ago, just shy of 700 plans and 23,000 employees. So it's been really, really popular. We think it's been relatively successful in keeping those folks, again, on the payroll, but perhaps just as importantly, attached to things like their healthcare during this really challenging time. I do have more details on WorkShare if folks want them. I won't get into the weeds too much here, but there were some laws passed as part of Act 185 to expand eligibility for WorkShare. And so I don't know if it's correlation or causation, but regardless, we're grateful that more businesses are taking advantage of this, keeping their employees attached to benefits and on the payroll. And we hope that WorkShare continues to be a strong option for employers going forward. And so that's kind of my pivot into recovery mode. But again, if Todd or other folks in this call, if you've got employers that are struggling or might be struggling going forward, WorkShare is a fantastic option for their employees. And like I said, there were some expanded eligibility pieces passed that allow companies to put fewer employees on that plan, reduce hours by a slightly larger amount, and all the benefits that are paid to employees on WorkShare will be covered through the CARES Act through the end of the year. So really a smart option for employers if they're struggling with keeping people on the payroll. But I just want to pivot into, as I said, we still have certainly have our hands full with unemployment insurance and have most of our resources allocated there to make sure we can serve claimants here in the state. But as we pivot toward recovery, we have a really strong set of workforce development services available to employers, to consortia, to employees to help them, hopefully be guided into a successful and inclusive and equitable recovery. And at no surprise to anyone probably on this call, the EVERS administration, feels really strongly that, the best thing we can do for economic recovery at this time is to continue to socially distance, wash our hands, and do all we can to prevent the spread of COVID, which, obviously is going to be a strong determinant as to what recovery looks like for Wisconsin, what it looks like for our businesses and for our workers. So we'd encourage everyone to look at the guidelines put out by the WEDC, the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, wedc.org/reopen-guidelines has a great list of what is out there. Provides some industry-specific guidance, so it's not just general guidance. They've got more specifics, best practices for childcare, all the industries in Wisconsin that are really highly affected by this. And so we'd really encourage folks to look at that. It's been guided through the expertise of national health experts. And so, we believe strongly in doing all we can to prevent the spread of COVID. But it's interesting as we look at, pivoting into recovery, even before COVID-19, it was really clear that there were some striking, fault lines in our economy, racial economic disparities, aging and declining populations in our state. We had some uneven access to medical care, child care, and of course, really sorely inadequate broadband in parts of the state. So there was lots and lots of work to do before COVID, but as we work to kind of rebuild our economy here in Wisconsin, we're certainly going to look at those challenges to not only get back to where we were, but hopefully improve on where Wisconsin was sitting as it relates to a lot of those issues. And one of our top priorities going forward, of course, is going to be serving those folks that were laid off either temporarily or permanently. And one of the ways that we can do that, and it's been out there for a while now, is our Job Center of Wisconsin free labor exchange. So that's free for both employers and employees. And I always get these two wrong, and I should always check, but I think we've got 250,000 resumes. At least last I looked, we did, and about 75,000 open job postings on jobcenterofwisconsin.com. So it's free, and it can be, it allows folks to match their skills and abilities to those job postings. Also identify some of those things from resumes, but we're hopeful that that can help by skill, by geographic location, by things like veteran status or military spouse status. But we are trying to connect every week with some of those folks. And unemployment insurance claimants are required to sign up for jobcenterofwisconsin.com. So there are a lot more people on there than there once were. And we're hopeful that those employers can connect. Even though our job centers right now are delivering most of our services remotely, with the exception of Wisconsin Rapids and Milwaukee are doing some by appointment in-person services. We're hopeful that whether it's jobcenterwisconsin.com or our job service folks, we can continue providing value add programs and policies for Wisconsin employers. We just within the last week or two had our first drive-through job fair in the Fox Valley in partnership with the Fox Valley Workforce Development Board. And reviews are in, and it sounds like it went really well, and there are more planned throughout the state over the next few weeks and months. Obviously, again, being really cognizant of social distancing, keeping the spread, or hopefully the lack of spread of COVID top of mind. But we want to make sure that we're paying close attention to that. Our business service teams are also connected locally, and I think we've seen this in the central Wisconsin area with Verso and that dislocation. Our rapid response teams, that work in conjunction with other entities, really know what they're doing. They do a great job, and so we're really crossing our fingers that there aren't many more massive dislocations. But to the extent that those happen going forward, we've got great teams in place around the state to hopefully minimize the impact of those layoffs, to do things about whether it's filing for unemployment insurance, whether it's career counseling, looking at health insurance options when folks are dislocated. Those rapid response teams are really skilled and experienced and know what they're doing. So they remain at the ready to help Wisconsinites and Wisconsin businesses going forward. And I guess the next couple of pieces here are more active training programs that our Division of Employment and Training have had, and we continue to tweak and continue to be cautiously excited about as we move forward here in the next few months, as we try to help Wisconsin shift into a strong trajectory toward recovery. But one of those programs is the Wisconsin Fast Forward program, which is meant to be a more flexible, creative, employer-led training opportunity. And we are likely going to be issuing another request for applications this fall. We just gave out about $2.5 million worth of awards at the end of June. But this is really an area that we can be flexible and can think about where is the greatest impact, where is the greatest need. And since we've taken office, it's been my priority and the governor's priority. It's been directed by him to look at both, obviously, the quantity of jobs, but really put an equal focus on the quality of those jobs and make sure that when we're investing in training programs, that those outcomes result in people not just being able to cover their basic needs, but being able to invest in themselves, in their future, in their health, in their communities. So I think we're excited about this next iteration of Fast Forward. And something else we really want to accomplish with that is obviously getting people employed, helping people advance, but make sure that the credentials and skills that the training programs provide are recognized and that they are transferable, so they can follow that employee within that industry to make sure that the state and our economy is getting the greatest bang for its buck. So I would encourage any employers on this call, if you're looking at doing any training in the next few months, to look at wisconsinfastforward.com. Again, keep your eye open for a new iteration of request for applications here in the next few months. And then something I just can't help myself from talking about whenever I get the chance is just Wisconsin's apprenticeship programs. It's been 110 years, I think, but we were the first state to do, or 108 years, sorry, 108, 109. Wisconsin was the first state in the country to do apprenticeship, and we still do it really, really well, both on the adult side, so registered apprenticeship, which is something that we'll probably always be bullish about, in the sense that it is a way to earn a living wage while learning an in-demand skill and earning a recognized credential that can follow you anywhere and everywhere. But it's obviously on-the-job training coupled with related instruction. And so we are working very hard on a couple of fronts for registered apprenticeship. One is to expand into new industries, also into new geographies, but also to make it more inclusive. We would like to see more women and minorities. Apprenticeship has not historically been very diverse, or at least the industries that apprenticeship has served. So we're trying to be very proactive in reaching out and finding ways to make that happen. But we just got a $9 million grant from the federal government to help expand apprenticeship in Wisconsin. So we're hoping to put those dollars to good use going forward to market apprenticeship, make sure that it's as robust and as effective as it can possibly be. And then Wisconsin also has a youth apprenticeship program, which obviously is going to be challenging with schools and some employers doing things remotely this fall. However, I think we were pleasantly surprised this spring by the effectiveness of the youth apprenticeship program in Wisconsin, even in a fully remote environment. And a lot of the employers and schools will be in person, but we continue to work closely with our apprenticeship partners throughout the state to make that successful, regardless of what the workplace or school looks like in fall of 2020. And I think one of the last things I want to talk about is just we are really excited also, if there are employers on this call, to have delivered an electronic workboard, which is probably more exciting to me than to most. But think about the workboard you see in your break room or near the water cooler that lays out all the labor laws that are applicable to both employees and employers, but with work transitioning virtually and perhaps likely seeing a much higher percentage of virtual work going forward. We thought this would be a strong value added to both of those groups. And so that is out there that shows all of the small business administration information that's out there, and it's actually accessible by QR code. So we're very excited about that. And so if anyone, I will follow up with the link for the e-workboard after this call, but we're pleased to have all of those in one place, as there's a chance that a lot of Wisconsin workers and a lot of Wisconsin companies could be operating virtually for some time going forward. We want to make sure that our workers, their rights are protected and that laws are followed, and that's something that we feel very, very positively about going forward. And just kind of getting back to that youth apprenticeship piece, we are investing about $5 million in grants to 37 consortia around the state, which is just shy of about 400 school districts. And we are, at this point, still projecting about 6,000 youth apprentices in those consortia throughout this coming school year. So even with the challenges faced by schools, by employers, we really think that we'll continue to see strong outcomes for our students, for our employers, and for our economy here in this next school year. So other than that, we continue to pursue federal grants that make sense for Wisconsin's workforce, whether that's an apprenticeship or elsewhere. We're currently pursuing an employment and training recovery grant from the federal government, but any way that we can invest in our state's workers, our job seekers, and of course our employers, we think will be to the benefit of our entire state's economy. And as the governor has made very clear to us, it's our top priority to make sure this recovery is as equitable and as inclusive as possible, and that even though we're in a new reality, when we return to normal, we want that to be a new normal, and we want that to be cognizant of the challenges that Wisconsin's economy faced prior to COVID, and hopefully sooner rather than later we can come out stronger than when we went into COVID. So that, in a nutshell, is kind of where we're at and what we're up to. But thanks very much for the chance to be here today. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions.
Well, thanks so much. That was quite a whirlwind tour of your department, and pretty extensive. Just a couple notes going backwards, and then we'll get to some of the questions. I don't know about the other school districts, but I know that Stevens Point High School is very active in the apprenticeship program, so we appreciate that. Those are great opportunities for the students, as well as at Mid-State Technical College. So that's great to see how that program has grown. You mentioned job fairs. Del Monte is having a job fair in our parking lot, actually, next Tuesday. They needed a larger space, so we're giving them our parking lot to do a job fair. And we also are having our own job fair at the Holiday Inn on September 28th. That'll be indoors, but obviously we'll be masking people, and we have social distancing. We're going to try anyway to do a face-to-face, and if people can't make it, we'll be sending out information to them if they're not comfortable attending that. So that's a good thing. I thought it was amazing that you grew from 500 to 2,000 employees in the matter of weeks. Lots of businesses don't do that over the course of years. So first going through the hiring process, then the training process, then getting them on the calls and dealing with stuff that they are just newly learning about. So I realize there's a lot of people who have had delays. People on the calls have talked about, 16 weeks, whatever. And I know that your staff and your folks are doing the best job they can as you're training people up, and the rules are changing from the federal government as well as state too. So I know it's a very personal thing with unemployment benefits, but thanks for sharing the challenges that you're going through and how you're trying to rectify that. So let's look at a couple questions. A lot of the questions initially, again, were about when will people be getting paid. I think you talked about some of the challenges, realizing that there is a backlog out there. And because I don't know the acronyms that well, Caleb, but in terms of SSDI recipients, is that generally the unemployed, or is that a specific segment? And how have you guys been handling those folks? And I'll unmute you.
Yeah, so it's interesting. In Wisconsin, there's a 2013 law that was passed that forbade SSDI recipients from receiving unemployment insurance, bar none. And then with the onboarding of the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, it was relatively unclear. And then initial guidance from the Department of Labor was that SSDI recipients would not be eligible for PUA. But internally in the Secretary's office and with the Governor's office, we did not agree with that interpretation. We felt it was really troublesome and problematic, and that if you are out of work through no fault of your own, that should be the litmus test for whether you are eligible for unemployment insurance or its equivalent. So we pushed and we pushed and we pushed, and we're really relieved and grateful to get a determination from a higher office of DOL, the Secretary's office of the Department of Labor, that SSDI recipients in Wisconsin would not, de facto be prohibited from receiving PUA. They still have to be eligible with the other qualifiers for that program, but we were really grateful that we were able to get that determination. And I think at that time, we had about 1,500 applicants for PUA that were receiving SSDI. And again, those folks have to be otherwise eligible, but we continue to work through those and are hopeful to serve some of Wisconsin's perhaps most vulnerable citizens and get them the benefits they need and deserve.
Do you have any, and this is a crystal ball question, but any sense, with some of the backlogs you've had, do you see a light at the end of the tunnel for this, or obviously new claims continue to come in, and also any crystal ball prognostication?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. I think we feel we're making really strong progress on PUA. We got a slower start on that than we would have liked. That's a really manual process. So when we do the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, which is the federal program for folks that otherwise wouldn't be eligible, your freelancers, independent contractors, that kind of thing. But we continue to churn out a lot of decisions on PUA, and it's been interesting. A lot of the denials that have come from PUA because they've already received UI or another program, and so we're really working hard to get through that. I think this morning I looked, we had resolved, I think, just over 60,000 PUA applications, and we've received just over 90,000. So we're hopeful to continue grinding through that group of folks. And then on the UI side, our adjudicators do continue to each week remove more and more issues and lift more and more holds, which is what we want to see, and it makes us feel good that the folks that we trained are making progress every week. But when the continued claims keep piling in, we are making progress, and we see that on the percentage of claims resolved. But hopefully those claims continue to abate and the issues continue to abate. But what we've been saying, at least for the last couple of weeks, is we monitor a lot of the stuff. We're hopeful that kind of that early fall timeframe will be back in a more normal space, and that there's a lot of different metrics as far as what normal looks like, whether that's PUA, whether that's UI, whether it's us holding on to vendors. But I think it ebbs and flows, and the projections are projections, and they're based on assumptions, and assumptions can, at least on the stuff we can control, are going really well. We're making greater progress on the issues that we're clearing. It's just the pace at which new issues pile up is challenging to project.
Exactly. And I'll tell the people who are on the call, if your specific question I didn't ask, I skipped over, I didn't ask it the right way, feel free to, in the chat box, put your email address, which would only be public to me, with your question again, and I can send that to Secretary Frostman's office, and they could get back to you. So if I'm not asking it in the right way, please feel free to put that in the chat box. There was a question about, let's see, let me scroll down a little bit more here. Ooh, that's a rather long one. Let me go back to that one. There is one person in here says, thank you for your work in sticking with the SSDI issue and getting resolved. So that's great. Another question here. So how can companies, especially those in critical industries, connect with unemployed workers? What's the best way to do that?
So one of the best ways to do that is through that Job Center of Wisconsin, that a lot of the claimants that have gone through the UI system will have a resume on file through Job Center of Wisconsin. And I know early on, one of the things we tried to do was to kind of marry those two populations of dislocated workers. And at that time, we had the designation of whether a business was essential or not. So it was these essential businesses and these dislocated folks, and had a special page. And we still have that COVID-19 in-demand jobs. So if employers are out there and want to put something in that portal, and that's just wisconsinjobcenter.org/look-for-jobs/in-demand. But that's out there, but that's probably the best way to do that. A lot of those folks that are in that repository are dislocated workers. And also, anytime we have a rapid response event, it would be very, I think, beneficial for employers to reach out to either that local job center and or to DWD to try to get in touch with those employees if they're looking for additional help.
Another thought that came up, and this may not be a question that I know you're able to answer any question, but this one may be outside of you, but are you seeing any, can you see any sort of a trend? Because there's some word out there with the $600 benefit that some people aren't seeking employment and all those sorts of things, that it's keeping people out of the workforce. And I know this next one, there's been some changes to try to address some of that. Anything you can share about that whole concept?
Yeah, that is a challenging concept. And, I think it's important, at least the way I've thought it through and tried to think about this in a bigger picture, that $600 a week, a couple of things are important to note is that it's meant to be temporary. And it's also, meant to be stimulating in nature in terms of stimulating the economy. That's not meant to be traditional UI. That's meant to help keep the entire economy afloat. So people aren't just, staying alive. They're able to still purchase the groceries they need to purchase. They're able to buy back to school clothes for their kids. And all of that ends up in the virtuous cycle of spending for our economy. So I try to keep that in mind. And a lot of the, reports I've seen, of course, anecdotally, I've heard some of that. But I've also, heard that a lot of the folks that aren't going back to work is that there's not the same demand for employees that there once was. And in some other contexts, I generally try to include when talking about that program, because we've been supportive of extending, the House plan of $600 a week, is that $600 a week, like regular UI, is taxable. And, that additional supplement also doesn't, it's not inclusive of a healthcare contribution. It's not inclusive of a retirement contribution. So there's, more to it than just the check that ends up in someone's direct deposit account. It's the other really sometimes high costs of living that, an employer helps at least defer some of that cost that's not included in the FPUC. So it's, it's certainly not an easy black and white answer, but I think, the intent of that was to create full wage replacement to keep the overall economy afloat. And so we're hopeful that, we continue to see something that keeps not just families afloat, but our state's economy.
Okay. Looking at some other, you talked about the youth apprenticeship program. You talked about some of the training programs. So how are DWD's business services teams continuing to help connect employers with workers while job centers are closed?
So I think it's a great question, and it's interesting. I think overall on all of our programs, we've been pleasantly surprised, whether it's our own worker productivity, whether it's been apprenticeship instruction, or in this case, delivering job center services remotely. So all of our job centers are physically closed, but they're all still providing services. So whether that's over the phone or via the internet, we've been learning a lot throughout this process, and it's been kind of a mixed bag in that I think we've been pleased with the quality of our services, but also it's been really enlightening how many either people aren't necessarily computer savvy or don't have adequate connectivity to connect with our services. But we've still been delivering all of our workforce services as possible through a virtual means, and obviously want to continue to watch very closely when it is safe to open remotely. We're watching the Wisconsin Rapids and Milwaukee job centers closely to see how this by appointment only piece is working. But all of those folks are still working. They are still delivering services, albeit in a different fashion. And like I said, it's been mostly really positive from the effectiveness, but also just realizing there's still a significant portion of Wisconsin that is not able to access remote services, either due to computer literacy or connectivity.
Okay. You mentioned the WorkShare program before. The WorkShare program is something that a business signs up for, so to speak, and offers it to their employees. It's not something that an employee can do on their own. It would have to be through where they work. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep. And that's, like I said, it's been a surprise, kind of a surprise success story, but we're really bullish on it. And a lot of actually Wisconsin's congressional delegation is also, really interested in and excited about WorkShare. But it is something the employer seeks. And generally speaking, we've had a really good ability to turn around applications pretty quickly. Like I said, if you're looking to stave off any layoffs, we can help with that. And at this point, with the new laws passed through Act 185, WorkShare plans only need to cover at least 2 positions. It used to be the greater of 20 or 10%. Now it's down to 2, so really flexible there. It used to also be between 10 to 50% reduction in hours. Now employers can reduce up to 60% of hours. And then again, like I said, maybe the kicker is that instead of charging an employer's UI account, all of those benefits paid out through WorkShare are going to be paid through federal dollars through the CARES Act. So there's been some pretty strong interest in expanding eligibility. I think those just go through the end of the year. I don't have the exact date on when those revert back to what they once were. But yeah, if there are employers, and we've had really good feedback and quick turnaround on those. So anyone on this call are aware of other employers that are looking at potentially doing any type of layoff, that's a great way to kind of get the best of all worlds.
Okay. And there was a more detailed question. I'll send it to your office, Secretary Frostman. You can address it specifically. Those are pretty much the issues, I think. Again, if you're on the call and I didn't get your specific question, just put your email address into the chat box and I can send that to Secretary Frostman's office and they can get back to you. Try to do the best job I could getting through all these. Some of the questions were fairly detailed, but I tried to at least touch on them in some regard. Anything you'd like to share to kind of wrap things up on our call? I know we're done a few minutes early, but nothing wrong with that. Anything you'd like to share, Caleb, as kind of a wrap up? And let me, wait a minute, let me get you unmuted here. There we go.
All right, I think I make the mistake when I mute myself, I think it requires you to unmute me too. No, just really appreciate the chance to be here today. And if anyone on this call, whether it's unemployment insurance or recovery programs has things that are working well or that they'd like to see, we're certainly open to those ideas and just grateful to be on the call today and glad so many folks were able to join us. So thank you.
Well, thanks for making yourself available and having the courage to put your face out there. Everybody's adjusting and pivoting, and thanks for all the work you and your staff are doing. And thanks for everybody very much for being on the call. And hopefully we can do one of these in a couple months or maybe a few months and talk about all the great things going on in our economy. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.